The X-Corps landing at Inchon in September 1950 and the 8th Army's breakout from Pusan led to a stunning turnaround in the Korean War. The risky plan of General Douglas MacArthur undermined the position of the Korean People's Army, and the rapid offensive led to its almost inevitable destruction. An extremely confident MacArthur told President Truman that organized resistance will end by Thanksgiving. He later announced to his troops that they would be home by Christmas. X-Corps, commanded by the always aggressive Major General Edward Almond, aimed to become the first United Nations force to reach the Yalu River. As temperatures plummeted in the North Korean mountains, Almond continued to order his commanders to advance faster. By late November, the 1st Marine Division, under the command of Major General Oliver Smith, and the 31st Regimental Combat Team of the 7th Infantry Division had taken up positions in the snowy mountains around the Chosin Reservoir. People's Volunteer Army. While confidence reigned at MacArthur's headquarters in Tokyo, Japan, the situation at the front became increasingly alarming. A Siberian cold front descended on the region and temperatures dropped to -36 degrees Fahrenheit. The unrelenting cold led to frostbite in the ranks, frozen weapons and medical supplies, dead batteries, and more. Worse, MacArthur and Almond ignored growing evidence that significant Chinese forces had crossed the Yalu to counter the UN advance approaching the Manchurian border. Chinese Chairman Mao Zedong ordered veterans of the 9th Army to attack American forces near Chosin. The Chinese Army, an estimated 120,000 troops from the 20th and 27th Corps, secretly took up positions alongside U.S. Marines and Army troops. 1 St. Marine Division, China attack. After midnight on November 27, 1950, Marines in their trenches heard strange sounds coming from the forest below. Loudspeakers broadcast curses and commands. Cymbals tinkled and horns thundered. And the chorus of Marines, "You will die tonight," came from waves of Chinese troops from the 59th, 79th, and 89th Divisions moving up the slopes in their white uniforms. Taken by surprise, the Marines crawled out of their sleeping bags and grabbed their weapons. Now, as star shells illuminated the ground before them, the Marines on the front lines tried to slow the overwhelming Chinese assault with M1 rifles, machine guns, and grenades. Lead Marine units around Udimni struggled to hold off the Chinese attack, while Charlie and Fox companies of the 7th Marines struggled to defend their thin lines near Tokton Pass. Fox's company, under the command of Captain William Barber, managed to hold the critical hill above Tokton Pass and the vital road below for 5 days. Despite a severe leg wound, Barber continued to move among his men's trenches, keeping them focused. Barber's company suffered heavy casualties in the battle. Only 82 of the original 220 men remained operational, but they also inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy. As it later became known, Barber's heroic command destroyed approximately 1,000 enemies in this epic battle in sub-zero weather. Operational 4C Vera. While the Marines were under attack west of the reservoir, the men of the 31st Regimental Combat Team had just reached their newly assigned positions east of the reservoir when Chinese soldiers attacked them from the 80th and 81st PVA divisions. Several key elements of RCT-31, including one of the 3 infantry battalions and an armored company, were far to the rear at the time of the Chinese attack. Heavily outnumbered, RCT-31 also had the disadvantage that its 2 leading battalions were not within range of each other. The Chinese were able to easily penetrate the gaps, and the risk of complete encirclement was high. Despite Almond's calls to continue the advance, Colonel Alan McLean recognized that the situation was desperate and ordered the northernmost battalion to withdraw south. Trying to get out of their positions, the soldiers suffered heavy casualties on the way back. In a confusing maelstrom of battle and retreat, McLean was captured by the Chinese and command passed to Lieutenant Colonel Don Feith, with the task force henceforth becoming known as Task Force Feith. Several attempts to relieve RCT-31, including several by the 31st Tank Company, were stopped on the icy road and driven back. Feith's headquarters reported that no new attempts to free them were expected. With ammunition running low and the bitter cold sapping much of their remaining will, Faith organized a desperate attempt to fight their way back to the Marines at Yalu River. With his more than 500 wounded men stacked on every available truck, Faith led his men through the terrible Chinese formation. Under machine gun fire that rained down on trucks and convoys, the command struggled to get to safety. At a sharp bend in the road, the besieged column encountered a Chinese checkpoint, which stopped their progress. Another crisis moment has arrived. Realizing that the only way to continue the retreat was to attack the Chinese forces on a nearby hill, Hill 1221, Faith gathered his remaining men and ammunition and attacked. In the desperate battle for the hill, Faith was mortally wounded by a Chinese grenade. He later received the Medal of Honor for his actions. 10 additional members of Task Force Vera will receive the Distinguished Service Cross. Of the command's more than 2,500 soldiers, more than 1,000 were killed or captured during the fighting. Faith's determined leadership prevented complete disaster, but at the cost of his own life, and Task Force Faith's sacrifice was not in vain. Without their stubborn resistance, the Chinese forces on the east side of Chosin would have quickly advanced and captured Yalu River, thereby dooming the more than 15,000 Marines fighting on the west side. Move in the other direction. By November 28, it became obvious to Douglas MacArthur that a withdrawal was necessary. The trip to Yalu is over. MacArthur ordered X-Corps to evacuate North Korea through the port of Hungnam. The Marines needed to act quickly or risk being surrounded and destroyed by Chinese forces that greatly outnumbered them. The key to this southward movement was the opening of the only road back to Yalu River and Koto River. The Chinese advance had already cut the road near Tokton Pass, and the Marines would have to retake this strategic location before continuing their withdrawal. The first phase of the breakthrough involved an epic march through a blinding snowstorm by the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, toward Fox Company's position. Led by Captain Ray Davis, the Marines marched like a chain gang of zombies across the wintry landscape. In a fierce battle, the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines recaptured Hills 1542 and 1419, allowing the remaining Marines to continue moving south. Davis later received the Medal of Honor for his vital leadership during this critical juncture. With all the remaining strength and endurance they could muster, the Marines fought for Tokton Pass on December 2 and reached Yalu River the next day. While providing close air support to troops around Chosin, Ensign Jesse Brown of VF-32 crash-landed his F-4U Corsair after coming under ground fire. Brown, the Navy's first African-American fighter pilot, was a popular member of the squadron. His wingman, Thomas Hutner, made the fateful choice to crash-land his own Corsair next to Brown's downed plane so he could come to Brown's aid. Hutner's repeated efforts failed to rescue Brown, who later died from the exposure and his injuries. Hutner, who returned to the carrier in a rescue helicopter, later received the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman for his actions. On December 11, the last remaining UN forces left Funcheon Pass, and the Battle of Chosin Reservoir came to a bitter end. Faced with ever-increasing numbers of Chinese troops, the Army and Marines of X-Corps reached the port of Hungnam and took part in the largest naval evacuation in U.S. military history.